Josh Friedman here, surrounded by the beautiful Bosnian hillside. There's greenery all around me here in the Srebrenica area of Eastern Bosnia. But this area has a very bloody past. In fact, it's a quite recent past. We're only going to go back 20 years to July 1995 during the Bosnian War, in which there were more than 8,000 Bosniak men and boys who were killed here in the largest mass murder that happened in Europe since World War II. The area that you see right over here has got an abandoned warehouse, but it's not just any abandoned warehouse. During the Bosnian War, this was occupied by UN soldiers, and specifically Dutch soldiers. They were tasked with protecting this Srebrenica area, which was supposed to be a safe zone. It was designated as a UN safe zone, but in July 1995, the Serb military siege enclosed on here, and the UN troops, the Dutch troops, surrendered. They gave up their arms, they cut a deal with the Serb military, they packed up, and they left. And after that, the massacre occurred. Under the leadership of General Ratko Mladic, the Serb military separated the Muslim men and boys from the women. The women were told to get out, and the men and boys were systematically killed up and down this area, this road, this Srebrenica area. It's got a couple little villages within it, and they were shot in warehouses and shot and killed up in the hills trying to flee. Others were hit with grenades. It was a bloody, bloody scene, and then on top of that, the Serbs buried the bodies in mud pits, in mass graves. They threw them in mass graves up and down this area, and it wasn't for several years after that the bodies were actually identified, and some of them still have not been identified. But now you can see behind me there is an official memorial, and there is a cemetery here with gravestones honoring those who were killed during the Srebrenica Massacre in July 1995. And you can even come here, not just go to the cemetery and the memorial, but you can actually walk through this former UN compound, this warehouse that's basically left just as it was after the massacre. It's quite a tough sight to take in, but it's quite incredible. But it also raises the question about the role of the United Nations in our lives and in the world, and specifically in conflicts. If you can zoom in behind me, at the entrance to this compound, you can see the letters UN. And on the other side it said Dutch Bat, which is for the Dutch UN troops who were here. They did not succeed in stopping the ethnic cleansing. In fact, this massacre, in a sense, popularized the term ethnic cleansing. Up the road a little ways is the town of Srebrenica. During the war, Bosnian Muslims fled there. The population grew into the tens of thousands because this was supposed to be a UN-protected safe zone. In fact, the UN troops who were here, they were part of something called UNPROFOR, the UN Protection Force. But that town up the road, Srebrenica, was ethnically cleansed. It is now a Serb town, part of Republika Srpska, the Serb entity within Bosnia. There were many men and women who fled, trying to get over these hillsides, walking 40 or so miles to try to get to Bosnian-controlled area. Many did not make it, many were killed, and many ended up in the mass graves. I know Nika, who is behind the camera, would like to discuss the role of the United Nations in this massacre, as well as in the world and in our lives today. I'm going to grab the camera now and we're going to have a little bit of a conversation.
Hello, Joshua. So your question was, what is the UN's role in our lives today and in the massacre and what's going on around us? Well, the same thing could be, if you look in the past, they say no more when the Holocaust happened. They say no more to mass murders, no more to genocides. And then the genocide in Rwanda happened, where 10,000 Tutsis were killed by the Hutus. And Belgian soldiers, UN peacekeepers, were assigned to be there to protect the people. But then UN decided to pull back their troops because the violence was getting too much to bear. And everyone left. The Tutsis were inside the same description of warehouse, United Nations warehouse, seeking refuge, seeking protection from the so-called United Nations safe zone. Only one general was left there, along with United Nations peacekeeper soldiers from Chad, trying to protect the Tutsis from the ethnic cleansing session from the Hutus. The same thing can be described here, as the Muslims were cleansed by the Serb army. And at that time, the same thing happened. The Dutch soldiers surrendered, the UN peacekeepers packed their bags and left those who were seeking refuge from them to die. And ended up in mass pits and right now in the grave behind us. So the role of the UN today, it's not much different than previously, I see, because as mass murders are still happening everywhere around the world, and they're still discussing of what should be done or what can be done instead of what has to be done. So I'm not sure if I would want to let my safety towards the United Nations, because it always ends up in the same way. It becomes a nightmare towards humanity, a nightmare for United Nations. They say no more, but it still happens again and again. So, back to you, Joshua.
The tensions remain here in this area of Eastern Bosnia. We've already taken a trip through much of Bosnia and explored some of the rifts between Serbs and Muslims or Bosniaks that remain. Well, I'm going to take you back not to 1995, but to July of this year, just 2 months ago. In fact, 2 months to the date. On July 11th, the 20th anniversary commemoration was taking place right behind me. And the Serbian president was here it was a very symbolic move that the Serbian Prime Minister, Alexander Vučić, was actually out here. Well, things didn't end also peacefully. Vučić and the posse around him had to flee the commemoration event because they were under fire. People were hurling stones at them and bottles, and there's images of Vučić running out of there with an umbrella over his head, trying to avoid getting hit in the face by the stones. So tensions remain here in the Srebrenica area, and the term ethnic cleansing now has gained notoriety, and there may not be ethnic cleansing still going on here, but when you go to the town, it has a very Serb feel, and it's a very divided area, and it's a sad thing to take in, but it is part of the world that we live in. And if you come out here to Srebrenica, there are going to be some lessons in reality. And that's going to be it for now from this supposed UN safe zone that is now part of the beautiful Eastern Bosnian landscape. Goodbye from Srebrenica, and I hope to see you in a happier place.